What is up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the best smartphones for under 150 bucks. So a lot of these phones are actually in the 120 range, brand new. So it's really awesome. So let's get started with the Redmi 9. So this is my favorite pick on the list. I think overall for 123 bucks, this phone is extremely solid. You have a full plastic design, but since it has such a big battery, it still has a good nice weight to it, so that it doesn't feel super cheap. I don't think it looks really cheap at all. But you also have a pretty big 6.5-inch display. It's an IPS panel, 1080p, 395 for the PPI. Overall, it's a really nice panel. It got pretty decent colors for an IPS panel, a water drop notch, good viewing angles. Overall, I was not disappointed with this phone. Out of the box, you get Android 10 with the MIUI 11 skin, the Media Helio G80 processor, and Mali G52. Definitely not a gaming phone, more for casual gaming and just casual use as far as like applications and stuff like that. You do have 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM, with micro SD card support as well, which is really nice. This phone does have a headphone jack and a single firing loudspeaker. In addition, you also get NFC and an infrared port on this phone as well, which is really nice. So this phone's highlight is definitely the camera. So you do have a quad camera setup, 13 megapixel standard and 8 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor that shoots in 1080p, along with an 8 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080p. Overall, you can see from the photos yourself, you're getting some really nice looking photos. Honestly, at this price point, you're not going to find a better camera phone really. It's just really good with detail. The ultra wide is great. You get a macro, a good depth of field. So for the price range, I'm not complaining at all with this phone. Another highlight with this device is the 5020 milliamp battery with 18-watt fast charging on here. So you're getting some really great battery life, all day battery life with this phone. So overall, just a great pick. Next is the Samsung Galaxy A11. This is also a pretty nice phone around that 120 range as well. You have a plastic design on here. You have a PLS IPS display at 6.4 inches and it is 720p plus, 268 for the PPI. Overall, I thought the panel was fine. In addition, you actually get a punch hole display on here, which I thought was pretty nice. And overall, you get decent colors, decent viewing angles on this phone. You actually get the latest version of Android with this guy, Android 11, with the One UI skin. The Snapdragon 450 and the Adreno 506 is on here. Again, none of these phones are necessarily gaming phones, more for casual use, Instagram, browsing the web, TikTok, stuff like that. I would necessarily try to do gaming because I get that question a lot. You do have micro SD support, 32 gigs of internal storage, 2 or 3 gigs of RAM depending on your configuration. And then you have on here a loudspeaker, a headphone jack, no NFC unfortunately, so you do not have mobile payments. Then you have a fingerprint scanner, rear mounted on here, works fine. I think that cameras on here are pretty good as well. I wouldn't say necessarily as good as the Redmi 9, but I think it's definitely up there. You can see from just the shots, a 13 megapixel standard, 5 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel depth sensor, 1080p on the front and back, 8 megapixel selfie. I think if you're in good lighting, this phone definitely takes a great photo. So I'm definitely wasn't disappointed with that. But again, you got to remember, these are basically almost $100 phones, so you can't expect too much. But I think that a lot of these phones do a great job these days in 2021 with taking photos, and again, in good lighting. If you take these phones out of good lighting and decent lighting, then it gets a little iffy. But overall, image quality is pretty decent on here. You also have a 4000 milliamp battery with 15-watt charging. Again, this is one of those phones that I definitely didn't struggle getting through a day with. This is a phone you can easily go a full charge and then go all day, and you don't really have to worry about battery life on here. So it does charge a little bit slow with that 15 watts. But overall, I think this is also another solid phone to consider. Next is the MOTO G8 Power. This is also a really excellent phone, and I'm going to do an updated video on this phone because I think it's aging extremely well. So you do have a plastic design on here, water repellent coating actually, so it can survive being in the rain. You actually have an IPS display on here, 6.4 inches, 1080p, $399. Display is great on this phone. It's got a punch hole as well, gets bright and you have pretty good colors on here. It's upgradable to Android 11, and that's also a highlight with this phone. It's basically stock Android on here, so it's very smooth for a budget phone. You also have the Snapdragon 665 and Adreno 610 on here with micro SD support and 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. So this phone performance wise was really fast, and you can actually do a little bit of gaming on here, sort of medium settings, which I found to be really nice on this device. So you also have stereo speakers, which is extremely rare on budget phones, so they are actually very loud and crisp and clear, so I really enjoyed that. Also, you have the headphone jack on board as well. There is no NFC though, so if you're somebody that depends on mobile payments, that is not here. You have a physical fingerprint scanner on the back that works very fast as well. And I also think the highlight with the G8 Power is the cameras. You have a 16 megapixel lens, an 8 megapixel telephoto, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, and a 2 megapixel macro, and you have a 4K video with a 16 megapixel selfie. This takes phenomenal photos for this price range. Color accuracy is great, detail is really solid on here, dynamic range. I thought the cameras were really good when I first got the phone, so I've always been impressed with image quality on this phone. You also have a massive 5,000 milliamp battery with 18-watt charging, so this phone definitely will last you all day, no problem. So I would highly recommend the G8 Power. Now, one of the most powerful phones on this list is the LG G7. So you can find this a little under 150. I've seen it trending around 130, 140-ish. This is basically an older flagship, and it has a lot of specs. So you have a full glass and metal design, so it's a premium design. Feels awesome in the hand. IP68 dust and water resistant as well. It's got a 6.1 inch IPS display, and it's actually a 2K or 1440p display, 564 for the PPI. Absolutely beautiful, super sharp display on here. It is a very nice display, especially for an IPS panel. You do have a little bit of a notch up top, but overall I think it is awesome. So you do have Android 10 on here, the Snapdragon 845, Adreno 630. You'd be surprised how this phone can actually play the latest games at high settings, no problem. So Call of Duty, Fortnite, it is extremely impressive. A lot of people forget that these older flagship phones have still very good chips in them. You also have micro SD support, 64 gigs of internal storage, and 4 gigs of RAM on here. You also have a headphone jack, and you also have a beautiful sounding speaker on here. It's just a single firing speaker, but it sounds amazing. And in addition to that, you do get that headphone jack with the quad DAC. So this is just a great audio phone in general. You will get some really good high quality audio experience. You also have NFC on board with this guy, a physical fingerprint scanner on the back, and you have a pretty decent cameras on here, a 16 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide, 4K video, 8 megapixel selfie. The cameras are the only thing on this phone that haven't aged that well. You just get okay shots. If you're in good lighting, you will definitely get a pretty good shot, but definitely not gonna blow you away or anything like that. But for me, I thought the shots were fine for what they were. So this phone also has a 3000 milliamp battery and 18-watt charging with wireless charging as well. One thing to note with the battery life, you can technically get all day battery life, but it's just barely all day. I'm usually getting around 6 hours, so 6 hours of screen on time is what I would call all day. But again, that's on the very low end, so you can do it. But if you're a heavy user on your phone, you may have to charge this guy up. Lastly, the Samsung Galaxy A20s. So this is also another interesting phone. So you have a plastic design on here. It's an IPS panel at 6.5 inches, 720p plus 264 for the PPI. Overall, the screen was fine. You have a little water drop notch. Nothing too crazy about it. Android 10 is on here with the Snapdragon 450. Adreno 506 GPU. Again, performance wise was fine on here. I did not notice anything crazy lag or anything. And again, a lot of these phones are more for casual use. You have 32 gigs of internal storage and 2 gigs of RAM, or 3 gigs depending on your configuration. You do have a headphone jack, a loudspeaker on here. It sounds pretty good. No NFC on this guy. And you also have on here a pretty decent cameras, a triple camera setup, 13 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel depth, shoots in 1080p, and then you have a 8 megapixel selfie that shoots in 1080p, Image quality is overall fine on this guy. You also have a physical fingerprint scanner on the back as well, which works great. A 4,000 milliamp battery, 15-watt fast charging. Battery life is actually pretty good on this phone as well. You can definitely get through a day of battery life with this guy. So that's my pick, guys. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.